They heard the knock on the armor. One knock, then silence, then voices, close, unhurried, moving around the hull. Inside the tank, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The commander placed his hand flat in the air. The signal was clear. Stay still. Make no sound. Outside, it was January 1944. The temperature was below -15. The ground around the tank was frozen solid. The men inside had been there for 6 hours. The tank was a T-34. It had been disabled during the opening phase of a Soviet push west of Kirovograd in central Ukraine in the first weeks of January 1944. The Red Army was pressing forward along a broad front, attempting to collapse German positions in the region. The fighting was fast-moving and disorganized in the way that winter offensives on the Eastern Front often were. Units advancing, losing contact, finding themselves in terrain that had changed hands without clear notice. The T-34 had taken a hit to the left track during an exchange with German armor near a frozen tree line. The track came off cleanly. The tank stopped. The crew attempted to assess their position and realized almost immediately that the ground around them had shifted. The forward elements of their own unit had continued moving. The German line, partly collapsed and partly repositioned, now ran in an uncertain arc somewhere to their east and south. They were between the lines, not far from either side, far enough from both that moving on foot in daylight was not a viable option. They stayed with the vehicle. That decision was made in minutes. The one that followed, how long to stay and when to move, would take the rest of the day to resolve. The interior of a T-34 in winter, without the engine running, loses heat quickly. The crew had shut the engine down to reduce noise and conserve fuel. Within an hour, the cold had come through the steel. Breath was visible. Movement was kept to a minimum, partly for warmth, partly because any shift in weight produced sound. The loader had a cut above his left eye from the impact that had disabled the track. A minor wound, but it had bled through the makeshift bandage by mid-morning. He kept pressure on it without being asked. Nobody had to explain the importance of staying quiet. The radio was operational but silent. Transmitting risked giving away their position. Receiving produced nothing useful. The frequency was crowded with fragmented traffic that gave no clear picture of where the front actually was or whether anyone was looking for them. Accounts from Soviet tankers who survived similar situations in this period described the radio silence as one of the hardest parts. The tank became an information vacuum. Everything that happened outside the hull had to be interpreted from sound alone. What they could hear, wind across the hull, occasional artillery, distant, directionless. The engine of a vehicle, not their own, moving somewhere to the southeast and then fading. Twice the sound of boots on frozen ground passing within a short distance of the tank. Once, a voice that stopped speaking mid-sentence for reasons they could not determine. Each sound required an interpretation. Each interpretation had consequences. The commander kept a mental map of what he heard and updated it continuously. He gave no orders that weren't necessary. He rationed information the same way the crew rationed water. The knock came in the early afternoon. One of the crew later described it as deliberate, not accidental contact, not a rifle barrel brushing the hull, but a single, intentional impact. Metal on metal. The kind of knock that was also a question. The crew had rehearsed this in the hours since they stopped. The commander had been explicit. No response, no sound, no movement until whoever was outside had moved far enough away that detection was no longer the immediate risk. The theory was straightforward. An abandoned tank and a crew hiding inside a tank looked the same from outside. The theory was easier to maintain when it wasn't being tested. The voices outside continued for several minutes. Records from this period of the Kirovograd offensive indicate that German units conducting tactical sweeps after engagements were checking disabled Soviet vehicles, partly for intelligence, partly for usable equipment, partly to confirm whether vehicles were actually out of action or only appeared to be. A T-34 that looked abandoned but still had an operational crew was a different problem than one that was genuinely empty. The crew inside did not know whether the soldiers outside had a way to make that determination short of opening the hatch. The hatch was not open from outside. The voices moved away. The footsteps crossed to another vehicle somewhere to the left and faded. Nobody inside the tank moved for a long time after that. By late afternoon, the situation had clarified slightly and worsened in other ways. The sounds from the east had decreased, suggesting that the German positions that had moved through the area during the day were consolidating further back or had shifted their attention elsewhere. That was the slightly better news. The fuel situation was the worst news. The engine had been run briefly twice during the day to prevent the cold from making a restart impossible. Each run had cost fuel. The tank's range, already reduced by the morning's engagement, was now limited enough that driving out, if the track could somehow be repaired, was not a realistic option. They were leaving on foot or not at all. The commander laid out the calculation to his crew. Their own lines were approximately 400 meters to the west-northwest. The terrain between their position and the tree line on that side was open ground, flat with no significant cover. In daylight, crossing it was close to impossible. At night, in darkness, with no moon forecast, it was difficult but conceivable. The wounded man, the loader, would need help across that ground. That slowed them. That increased the time they would be exposed in the open. They would wait for full dark and then move. Darkness came at around 5 in the afternoon. The crew waited an additional 40 minutes before the commander opened the hatch. Cold air came in. He scanned the ground slowly, a full rotation, unhurried, using the edge of the hatch as cover the way he had been trained. Nothing moved that he could identify. He gave the signal. They came out one at a time. The loader was third. His arm was stiff from the cold and from holding pressure on the wound for 6 hours. The man behind him steadied him on the way down from the hull. They moved in a line, low to the ground, toward the tree line to the northwest. The snow muffled sound in both directions, theirs and anyone else's. At one point, a vehicle started somewhere behind them, and they stopped, motionless, for 2 full minutes before it was clear the vehicle was moving away from them. They reached the tree line. A Soviet forward position was established inside the trees. The soldiers there had been told a tank crew was unaccounted for. When 4 men emerged from the open ground, they were challenged and then recognized. The crew was intact. The loader required medical attention for the wound and for mild frostbite in 2 fingers. The T-34 remained where it had stopped. It was recovered several days later when the front had moved far enough west to make the area safe to work in. What accounts like this one contain is specific and worth holding clearly in mind. This was not an exceptional situation on the Eastern Front in the winter of 1944. Disabled vehicles and isolated crews were a routine product of fast-moving armored engagements. What varied was the outcome, and the outcome depended on a sequence of small decisions made under conditions that gave very little reliable information and no good options. 1 knock on the armor, 6 hours of waiting, 40 minutes after dark before the hatch opened. The margin between those men returning and not returning was that thin. Records from the same offensive period document crews in comparable situations who did not return. Same type of tank, similar terrain, similar circumstances. The difference is not always explainable in terms of skill or training or command quality. Sometimes the difference was the specific soldiers who were sweeping the area and whether they had the time or the inclination to do more than knock. The crew of that T-34 got home because of what they decided and because of what the soldiers outside decided not to do. Both facts belong to the record. If accounts like this one, specific, documented, and measured in hours rather than miles, are the kind that stay with you, consider subscribing. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. These are the stories worth examining carefully.